In this video, I'm going to be showing you guys how I make some hardtack. So this is pretty close to what they made in the Civil War. A little bit different, but it's basically it's literally just flour and water. But it's basically just a way of preserving a bread ration or preserving flour. So this is some examples of what I have right here. So it kind of looks a bit like what they had in the Civil War, like the size. They vary from like some were 2.5 inches or whatever. Before I started measuring them, I was just eyeballing it and trying to get as many as I could. For what I'm doing, it's just 4 cups of flour and 1.5 cups of warm water. And it could be not hot water like scalding you, but warm water. Like nice, comfortable, warm water. And this is what you get after you knead it, but it needs to come out to the consistency of a dry dough. So after that, it needs to sit for a half hour, and I just kind of cut out the whole mixing part because you just mix the water in and stir it. You don't just dump all the water in at once. You just slowly mix it in, and I'm sure everybody knows how to do that. But now I'm going to go ahead and show you how I actually form it, cut it, and then go through the baking process. So let's go ahead and get to that. First thing you're going to want to do is gather up your tools and have them ready. I have a glass of water here, and in it I have a little knife for cutting. I have a little skewer, a little wood skewer for making the holes, and then I have the fork that was used for mixing because I'm making several batches. It'll suspend it in water, prevent bacteria buildup, yada yada. And then obviously you're going to want extra flour to kind of take away the wet surfaces. And you're going to need a rolling pin, which I got to grab, and also a ruler so you can measure out the size of them. So the size of them is basically like 3 inches by 3 inches typically, and that if you keep a consistent measurement, it'll be easier to store up your food. So the things I like to do is get a little bit of flour and just roll it on there, just to kind of dry off the top surface so it doesn't stick to the roller. Getting it kind of square for a reason, because we're going to do what's kind of like forging. Now, one thing they did in the Civil War, and this is where we use history as a lesson, is they actually folded it in on itself. So they did a third fold, a third fold, and then a third fold inward, and then a final third. And then push it down, turn it over, and then begin rolling it out and try to keep it as square as possible. Now that this is all rolled out, it's going to take me a little bit of time, but in that time I'm going to be able to preheat the oven. You preheat the oven to 450 degrees, and you want to get a pan that has water in it, and this is all I'm going to use. It's going to have water about 2/3 of the way high. That's about enough for the cooking process. So I'm going to get this preheating and while I'm working on this, so it should be preheated by the time I'm done with this. So after you've got the oven going, what I like to do is I like to actually plot out my measuring points to see where I'm going to have to make cuts. You know, for 3 inches, I went ahead and plotted them out around the excess. So this wouldn't be a complete piece, but I know I'll have to trim off from here to go ahead and get a complete piece, at least at some point. So this gives me a rough idea on where the excess can be cut off. So let's go ahead and cut off the extra stuff. I find that it actually helps to just dip this in water, and I know some people are saying, well, you're putting too much water in it. We'll go ahead and talk about that later, but my little cut off pieces, I like to put them in a bowl or whatever and then roll them out a little bit later to make dog biscuits. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use my skewer and I'm going to do a 4x4 pattern and push it down relatively close to the edge, swirl a circle around it. I'll do this one here, and dipping it in water does help so it doesn't really stick all that much. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and this helps prevent the dough from rising too much, because it will actually rise if you do this process correctly, such as like resting it for 30 minutes, kneading it, and doing that forging that I was talking about, where you're actually folding in a third and folding in a third, and so on and so forth. If you do that, it will come out correctly. So after these holes are made, I take them off. I can handle them, and that's what it'll look like. Okay, so all that is done, and the worst part about this is when you're doing this, it will be a little bit tacky, so I find that poking the holes first is a lot easier, and then laying down a little bit of flour always makes things a little better, like on the bottom, because you should be able to kind of push these around a little bit. They shouldn't be like sticking all that much. The next thing that you're going to do is a little bit controversial, to like putting flour on these and like tacking them up, or taking away the tackiness. You're going to add a little bit of water to your hand, and I'm just going to get this from the sink, and getting a little bit of water on my hand, and I'm just going to dab them all over the top. Now that this is done, I'm going to throw this in the oven, but before I do, I am going to, since I have room, I'm just going to flour these up a little bit, and rub a little bit of flour in here. I don't need to do any holes. These are just dog biscuits, basically. So now I'm going to throw this in the oven, and it's only going to go in for 20 to 25 minutes. I've found that that's a pretty good time frame, and then I'll go ahead and guide you through the rest of the way after that. Once your timer goes off, or you've reached about 20-25 minutes or so, turn off the oven, and then you're going to want to open up this door and just get your water pan out. And be very careful with this. Most of the time I have a good amount of excess, so I don't want to spill it all over the place. Be careful, but don't take your time, if you know what I mean. And just dump that out, and immediately close it back up. And now you're going to let these rest until it's cool. Now the way I can tell is basically at the top of my burner here, right here is a vent. And I just put my hand in front of it, and if it's still pushing heat out from the oven, then I know that I still have to let this cool, because the oven has to cool down, and you're going to use the rest of the heat in here to continue drying these out. It's probably going to take a couple of hours. It could take more, but this is why this is your gauge. So I'm going to estimate it's going to be a couple of hours, but this is also the reason why you don't want to leave the oven open or open it up in order to check on things. Just have faith in the process. You know what I mean? So once the cooling process is all done, and you can actually pull the pan out without, it being warm, it should be basically room temperature when you pull it out. You go ahead and pull it out, and you're ready to collect. So I already took all the dog biscuits out. I measured these all to make sure that they were, good size. This one seems to be like the smallest one, but, whatever. I just didn't film me messing with it. So this is one of the dog biscuits. You can see how it puffed up compared to something like this, like one of the pieces, how it actually maintained its shape and its size. So anyways, all these turned out pretty well. Just some of the smaller pieces browned a little darker. But one of the reasons you don't want these browning and darkening up is it actually will cook off a lot of the nutrients that is inside a lot of this bread. Like, we typically will have vitamins put into our flour, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, especially if you're only getting bread. But whole wheat is theoretically a little more healthy than, the finely refined, like, all-purpose flour or whatever. But, whatever. I usually just use plain all-purpose flour anyway, so I'm just using this up because the flour has been sitting in the pantry for a while. So there you have it. 13 pieces of hardtack made. Take about, a few hours, probably 3 hours total to make this, and it'll last a lifetime. But, generally speaking, in the Civil War, this would have lasted about a day, maybe a little more, because it's 13 instead of like 9 or 10 pieces. So anyways, for 3 hours work on a cookie sheet, you can actually get a day. You can get a day's ration out of it. So anyways, I appreciate you guys watching. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and you guys have a good one.